Hello and welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. So today I'm painting another mini from the Cyberpunk Tabletop Miniatures game. This time we're going to be painting this young lady with the fully automatic weapon. They do say that the quickest way to a man's heart is usually right through the ribcage with a hollow point. We're going to start off painting the shoes and kind of working from the ground up. So first I decided I want the shoes to be a bright white to kind of offset the model in the previous video where I had the blue on the bottom and purple on the top. With her I'm actually going to flip it over, and so I wanted to do something a little different for the shoes and make them a nice bright white to kind of complement the rest of those neon colors that are going to be painted on her. So as I did in the previous video, start with a base coat of Celestia gray, and we'll have to slowly layer up through that, first with an Ulthuan gray and then white scar on just the very highlight tips. And even though this is a very good paint over a black base coat, you're still going to need 2 thin coats just to get your basic solid coverage. Now that the first layer on the shoes is dry, we're going to turn to painting the pants, and we'll use that same blue-violet color from Vallejo to cover the pants there. And I don't know what they do with the pigment. I don't know what it is about this paint, but it goes on like butter. It covers nice and evenly, and you don't need more than a single coat. I wish all paint colors could be this easy to work with. So we're going to finish painting on all of that basic coat on the pants. And fortunately there are those knee pads in there to offer a nice easy divider, so even though the white on the shoes might still be a bit wet, I don't have to worry about accidentally the paint running into the 2 different colors because those knee pads are in there. And once I finish off with the initial layer for the pants, I'm going to go back and do that second layer on the shoes to make sure I get a solid white base coat. Now, just like we did with the previous model with the Street Samurai, while we're waiting for the purple and the white to dry fully, we're going to start painting the top with this electric blue from Vallejo Game Color. This is not quite as solid of a pigment as the purple, but it still covers really nicely. It's a nice bright blue. If anyone's ever painting anything icy, this is a great color to dry brush as kind of your mid-tone between the dark blue and the super white, like the super white that will be glaring from my head if I stick it any more in the camera there. So we'll finish painting the coat on here. By that point the pants and shoes will be dry and we can move on to our next step. With the first coat of the blue finished, we're now going to give it a chance to dry a bit and return back to the shoes to put on the first highlight using Ulthuan Gray. And here again, like with the previous video, I'm going to avoid trying to use any kind of washes to darken the gray, or I'm sorry, darken the white. Instead, the Celestial Gray will be as dark of a shadow as you need, and instead you lighten up from there. So I'll be putting Ulthuan Gray on pretty much most of the shoes, since it's very bunched up and folded, so there's lots and lots of raised areas to work with. But I'll put a highlight of this Ulthuan Gray all over the shoes, and even by the time that's done, you'll see a very, very stark contrast, a very bright difference between the gray and now the layer of white that's on top of it. As I'm watching this here and seeing myself switch to the other shoe to paint it, I thought maybe I should have done each boot a different color. Now that would have been very cyberpunky. You do one shoe a super bright color and then another one a very different bright color. I'll have to keep that in mind for future videos. I'm sure there's at least one model that that would work out nicely on. So we'll finish up with the other side of the shoe here, and then we'll see what comes next. So while waiting for the coat on top to dry a little bit more, we're going to paint the knee pads. And for this I decided to go for a dark color. There's a lot of bright colors on her already, and so I don't want to overwhelm it and turn her into like a rainbow or a neon sign, although she's close enough. So we're going to start with some Kantor blue on the knee pads, and then we're going to do a very selective edge highlight, just the edges, so that the knee pad has this very dark blue appearance, but the highlighting of the much brighter blues will give it that futuristic look that we want to see in a cyberpunk miniature. So I'm just finishing up the knee pads here, and while I was looking over the coat, I don't know if it shows up well in the video here, but while the blue coat dried, it was very patchy. You could still see the black primer showing through. So I had to do another coat of that, which of course you then have to wait to dry, so it's a bit of a delay. In the meantime, some of you may have noticed, maybe not, that in the first video I had a painting handle that I was using to hold the miniature. This one I'm actually holding it by hand. I'm still trying to experiment with what works best for these videos, since I'm still new to it. So I thought I'd paint one with it, one without it. see if maybe it's less of a distraction having both my hands there. Maybe it's easier for me to control and hold it in front of the camera. So I'm curious. Let me know if you've seen both videos, what you think. If not, what would be your preference? Do you think it's easier to use the handle, it's easier to see what I'm doing, or is it entirely just artist preference? Okay, so now that both pants and coat are dry, we can start our highlighting, and I'm using the exact same format that I used previously, a 1-to-1 ratio of white scar with the base paint, in this case the purple. And just like with the previous model, this one's actually very easy to highlight because the folds in the fabric are very, very pronounced. They're very obvious. There's not a lot of guesswork of where to put this edge highlight. So make sure your brush and your paint are nice and wet and slick so the paint doesn't pull or tug. It should flow on nice and smoothly, and just start painting all those little ridges and edges where the fabric is crumpled. Repeat this process for the blue, again using roughly a 1-to-1 ratio. Mix the paints however you'd like. As I said, I try to avoid paint mixing because I can just never get the same consistency past the first models. But I don't have a color on hand that is easily the highlight of this electric blue. It's already a very, very bright color. So I mixed it just to see how it worked. And while we're waiting for the highlights on the purple to dry, we're going to finish here doing the highlights on the coat, and then we'll turn to doing the pinpoint shading. Now when it comes time to do the shading, I wanted to do something a little different. Now both these models that I've painted here, this one and the Street Samurai, they both come from the same gang. And so I wanted them to have a uniform color. That's why I used the blue and the purple and just flipped where it was on them. But I wanted to see something a little different for this one, so I tried doing the pin shading with Guilliman Blue Glaze. Since it's not as dense or as pigmented, I guess, I don't know if that's the right word, it's a lighter blue. It's still a nice runny kind of a paint, so it'll go into the recesses, but it won't be nearly as harsh as the Drakenhof Nightshade. The problem, of course, is it might not be dark enough and not show up at all. So we'll see how it looks when it's done. So when it was done, it worked. You can definitely see the contrast between the peaks and the valleys on the cloth, but I think I would stick with the Drakenhof Nightshade. It's just a little bit deeper of a blue, although the Guilliman Blaze was really good to put along the edge here, because you could simply paint across the hem of the jacket and it won't darken the whole thing. Well, now that we're waiting for that to dry, let's move on to painting the skin and some of the other areas here. So I've decided to go with a Dryad bark as my first base coat here. There's not a whole lot of skin on this model, so this should be pretty quick, but I find Dryad bark is a nice starter tone for darker skin tones. So we'll put that on there and then we'll move on to the highlight. So I'm going to move on now and paint the strap that's going across her chest there. Now you can see I've also painted the white shirt underneath. Unfortunately, the actual camera footage of that was more of my massive bald head rather than the actual painting. So I figured you didn't want to see that. You can thank me in the comments. Here I've decided to go with the leather, something nice, neutral, earthy. There's plenty of neon and bright and shiny, so I wanted something in there to kind of tone it down a little bit. So I used Mournfang brown as the base coat, just to give it a nice dark brown solid base, but that's not going to be the final color of this particular part of the model. But for now we just got to block in the color. I'm going to go back to the skin now and do a highlight using Gorthor brown. Now there's a lot of different ways you can really subtly adjust the skin tone. So you could do a wash after the base coat and then a highlight. You could do a highlight, then wash that, then do another highlight of the same layer paint over top. And you can get a lot of this really subtle variation. That way you can paint a whole unit of characters that are all the same general skin color, but they won't look like cookie cutters. In this case, I'm not going to use a wash at all. Instead, I'm just going to go and put the Gorthor brown directly on top of the Dryad bark, but only hitting really highlighted areas. So knuckles, the top finger that's actually around the trigger, the fingertips that are curling or cradling the gun from underneath. And then when we get to the face, just the ridge of the nose, the cheekbones, and maybe a little bit of the forehead to distinguish the parts of the face that are going to hit light the most. Depending on how the mouth is, you might put a little bit on the chin. And you want to be careful though, if you put too much on the wrong place, the model will look really kind of funky. So when highlighting faces, less is definitely more. With that done, we'll jump down to the bottom of the model and we'll now do the pinstripe shading on the pants using Druchii Violet as our wash here. And this one's the same as I used on the previous model. I really like the color that it gives. It's really quick and easy to get it into those cracks and crevices. And we're getting close to being done, and she's looking pretty good so far. We'll turn now to the knee pads, and here the first highlight is going to be with Caledor Sky, just over maybe the top third of each piece. So the knee pads in two separate pieces, not the whole thing, maybe the top half, but I definitely want a lot of that blue showing so that you can see a nice gradual fade from the dark blue into the light blue, or highlight, I guess, whatever you want to call it. The point is, don't paint over the entire knee pad if you want to give it that kind of futuristic armor look where it's colored instead of being metallic. Caledor Sky dried pretty quickly, so I was able to jump right to Temple Guard Blue, which I chose from the last highlight. Now, any light blue is here. I didn't want to use the electric blue and have it match the coat. That would have given it would have looked too similar. So instead, Temple Guard Blue is kind of a lighter teal. There's a little bit of green in there to separate it. And for this one, just edging. Just the very tops of each pad, the very tip of the front of the knee pad, and then the tip around the edges of the band going around the leg. When it comes to painting weapons, I really only have two schemes that I use, and for this one I chose to use the gray version as opposed to my blue version. So I start off with Eshin Gray, and in this one you want to outline the entire weapon. Every edge, every corner, every section of the weapon. You'll see here when I'm doing the bottom here with the magazine, that you outline all of it. You don't cover it because you still want the primary color of the weapon to be black, but you want to give it a lot of definition on the edges and such. Otherwise it'll look like she's holding this big black just blob. It won't look nice. It won't stick out. You can't see the detail on the ridges. So Eshin Gray over everything is your start. After the Eshin Gray, we're going to grab Dawnstone, and this time we're going to highlight only the sharpest edges and the topmost edges. You don't want to go over everything you did with the Eshin Gray, or the gun's going to look like a kind of a strange like neon, because every single angle, every single edge has the same kind of treatment. The trick here to giving it an element of realism is that only the top areas and the sharper areas and the more pronounced areas are going to get this second highlight. And so once the Eshin Gray and the Dawnstone dry on top of that, you'll get this nice fade from the dark black into the lighter gray where the highlights are for where the light would be hitting the weapon. And I find this to be a nice standard. It works well. The same process, if you want kind of a blue steel look, is to use Incubi Darkness and Thunderhawk Blue instead of Eshin Gray and Dawnstone. You do the exact same method, just those different colors, and your guns will look like they have that really oily blue look to them instead. While my various gray tones are still wet on my wet palette, I'm going to do some just quick touch-ups on the hair. Since the hair is very, very poofy, very curly, there's lots and lots of texture, lots of things to highlight here. I'm being kind of quick and messy with it, but I mean, it's hair. It's supposed to be, in this case, frizzled, frazzled. So picking up some of those edge highlights with a lighter gray is going to make them stick out a bit. Otherwise, the hair is just going to look too solid. The whole trick to painting miniatures is contrasting light. Highlight and shade, light and dark. Now, when I was finished with the hair, initially I thought I was all done, but that's just not cyberpunky enough. That much hair would absolutely have colors, streaks, some kind of pattern or definition in it. So I experimented a bit with. I grabbed some Emperor's Children pink and started painting some stripes down the hair. And this is the same pink that I put around the belt on the Street Samurai. So this way we still have that consistency across the entire army. And then I'll be highlighting it here with Fulgrim pink. After finishing that little pink V and contemplating my life choices to actually put it there, I get the Dawnstone out and do a selective highlight on the rest of the hair, because those pink stripes are going to be very bold and very contrasting. You want the rest of the hair to kind of stick out as well. So I'm just selectively, you don't have to paint every hair on the head, but enough that it still maintains the texture of being hair. Going back to the belt across the chest now, I grabbed some Doombull brown because it's a bit more of a red look to it. I think it looks more leathery. The Mournfang brown is used a lot for ground, for dirt, for basing, and so I don't think it works by itself as a leather on its own. Instead, I like to add something to it to give it a little more warmth of a tinge. After painting the Doombull brown, I'm going to do a wash with Agrax Earthshade, you know, the mother of all washes, just to get those recessed areas. As you saw, I just did dots on the belt. So at this point, she's pretty much done. But again, as I sat there questioning my life choices, I kept looking at those highlights in her hair and thought she looks more like she's trying to get television reception or something. I had the right idea of putting some neon pink in the hair, but I think the execution failed. I mean, as a bald man, I know nothing about highlights in hair. So I figured maybe I'd fix it by adding a few more. Maybe the problem was just, it wasn't that, maybe it was the symmetry, I don't know. So I put in a few more stripes to really make it look like she's gone crazy with the hair dye. So a few more lines of the pink, following the same format as last time. First Emperor's Children as your base. You might have to do 2 coats to show over the black. And then falling over top with with Fulgrim pink to give it the highlights. And although here she might be looking like some kind of intergalactic skunk, it seems a little bit more steampunky to me. So I was a little more happy with this than the initial 2 stripes going down the back of the head. And with that, she's done. I haven't decided what to do for basing yet. That's why I didn't bother to do that. I'm still waiting to build the whole army before I figure that out. But we now have our second Cyberpunk miniature finished. I'll start painting a few more from the other side. These are both from the same Tyger Claws clan. But I hope you enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, share it, and I'll see you on the next one.